Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neither Cruel Nor Cowardly panel at Console 20 Room 2022, Satellite 9. There's a lot of other panels. There's a great Discord conversation going on. We're glad you're here, and we're especially glad that you are part. You're taking the time to join our panel. We are recording this panel on December 28th, so if there's something that happens at the in the Eve of the Daleks that we are omitting, we apologize, but time travel is not has not been invented yet. And you're probably all wondering, who the heck is that dude? I'm going to go around and start introductions with our panelists. My name is Gordon Demowski, and I am the lead organizer for the Chicago Doctor Who meetup, as well as a professional author.
And my name is Kathy Cole. I am an IT healthcare specialist by day, and by night a big Doctor Who fan. I go to several Doctor Who conventions in the US as well as other conventions, so you might have seen me. I do cosplay, so I look different than this normally. Nice to be here.
I'm Eric Branson. I am a co-host of the Police Box in the Junkyard podcast, as well as just a big Doctor Who fan. I was at one time a member and quite often a attendee, I guess is what I'm trying to get to, of Gordon's meetup group in Chicago. So that's how we know each other from a ways back, and a regular at the Chicago TARDIS convention. So maybe some of you recognize me from there as well. And like Kathy said, pleasure to be here. Thanks for putting this together, Gordon. Thanks to everybody at Console Room for putting the whole thing together. It's a pleasure to be involved. So
cool. And thanks to the two of you for joining us. The subtitle of this panel is about Doctor Who's approach to values and morality, and it's kind of a spinoff of a panel that I did in 2020 at Chicago TARDIS about Darkness Never Prevails. And I wanted to kind of have a talk about the values and morality that Doctor Who kind of provides, because it's over the years, it's talked about it. And I kind of wanted to start with a very basic question, which is, we're in year 2 of COVID. It's I think the Daleks would be easier to deal with. So how have we found comfort in Doctor Who? What are the values that give us that comfort as we're dealing with the insanity outside?
Well, I think Doctor Who has always been a comfort food. I mean, since I've gotten into it, which I'm relatively, compared to many people I run into at conventions and stuff, I'm a little bit of a noob, but it's been over a decade for me at this point. But yeah, it's always been kind of like a warm blanket comfort food type show, no matter what is going on in my life. So the past couple of years, obviously, I think everybody's just kind of had a heightened sense of some stress and just the outside world not being at the worst, I guess, threatening to your well-being and such. So yeah, I think taking solace in the things that make you happy is important, and Doctor Who certainly plays a major role in my life in that sense. Character-wise, like straight up, like out of the show, I think that and I think that's what we're going to dive into talking a lot about this evening. But there's the Doctor himself, herself, their self. I don't know how we do it these days with it being Jodie being the Doctor now, but the Doctor herself is just such a kind of beacon for goodness, for for a certain sense of morality. Definitely I almost said soldier. That is totally the wrong word. Anyway, stumbling a little bit, but yeah, it's certainly been a comfort to me throughout COVID. I'll leave it there, and we'll back to me in a minute. I'll collect my thoughts.
I think for me, the thing that's comforting about Doctor Who is who the doctor is, man, woman, whatever. You know, the doctor isn't human. The doctor looks like a man or looks like a woman, but the doctor is the doctor. And the doctor's never cruel, never cowardly, doesn't like guns. I mean, it's pretty clear across all the incarnations of the doctor, they're anti-weapon. And they usually diffuse the people with the weapons. And the fact that the doctor is still going to be helpful, is still going to be kind, is still going to look for ways to help. And even when the situation seems hopeless, even when there's a bad choice, the doctor is still going to try and make the less bad choice. And having those things be the same has been the comfort for me.
Yeah, I kind of see it along similar lines as the both of you. And I think the one thing for me is that the doctor is always, he's a character who at his core kind of questions himself, that he's about hope and he's about kindness, but he stops. On the classic end, there's the scene of Tom Baker, Genesis of the Daleks, the two wires, have I the right to kill the Daleks? But I think also in the new series, I think moments like David Tennant telling the Cybermen, hey, look, you're in their homes, you have their children, of course they're going to fight back. Or Matt Smith's rule of, good men don't need rules. Today is not the day to find out why I have so many. Or even Jodie's kickoff line, which is, I'm here to sort out fair play throughout the universe. And so I think with the show, there's a lot of, maybe without even meaning to, there's a lot of, it's hopeful, but it's also about doing the right thing and kind of checking your conscience and weighing the choices versus kind of maybe a stricter kind of, black and white. Like Steve Ditko would not be a good Doctor Who writer. I mean, thoughts on that? Oh, Eric?
Yeah, and I definitely want to agree with you on that, and that the kind of, I don't know if you call it a gray area, but that the doctor is never an extremist, never totally convinced of, her own absolute authority on any issue necessarily, does question herself, does turn to others for advice at the time, often as the smartest person in the room. But I mean, this also depends on which doctor. Some doctors will play that up a little more than others and be a little less tolerant of, the other people around. But certainly in the modern series, the doctor is a bit more of a team player, I think, than in the past. But what I was trying to get at earlier, and then totally wrapped myself up in my thoughts, is just that the doctor as a character has so many traits that are like exactly the traits that you want to see in like your family, friends, leaders, coworkers, all these. So during the pandemic, I think it's become very obvious that not everybody is like that. And that's kind of disturbing, because I think for a lot of us, that do surround ourselves with people that are, exemplify the things that we see as good, to find out that, wait, there's all these others among us out there in the world that don't see the world that way, that are, aren't reacting or aren't trying to protect their community, aren't, not to get too polarizing about it, but yeah, aren't taking precautions and, living for the greater good of everyone. And I think that was scary about the pandemic. And I think coming back to the doctor as a character and as a source of comfort, the show as a source of comfort, kind of puts us back in that place where all is right in the world. So,
Okay, Kathy, you have your hand up.
Yep. So for me, I think about kind of going back to David Tennant's era when he had that Time Lord Victorious arc. And even he had that moment where he thought, hey, I'm the only Time Lord left. I write the rules now. But even he checked himself at that moment and knew that he couldn't, be the only one, that there was some source of truth outside of himself in that moment. And I think that's one of the guiding principles of the doctor that's hard for people to understand, because the doctor keeps himself in check, and we're really bad at that as humans. I know all of us, we all like have aspirations to be a certain moral way, and sometimes we meet those aspirations and sometimes we don't. But the doctor, when it's essential, always does, and is always that person, like Eric was saying, that we can look up to, that, does lead when the situation calls for it, does can be counted on to do the right thing and to have sage advice. And to not just, at best, the doctor's like, I don't know, let's go find out. And and at worst, like, that's like the worst the doctor would do. It's like, let's explore this and get some options and figure out what we're dealing with, instead of just jumping to a conclusion and jumping to following a trail, which might not even turn out to be, beneficial in the end. And so the doctor's ability to explore, to have fun, to have a sense of wonder, I think those are also part of the morality of the doctor, that maybe is a little more obtuse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in looking at kind of how the doctor relates to humanity, one of the things there's always been, and I'm just putting that out there for kind of to get your comments. It seems like there have been times where with especially with his companions, sometimes the doctor, even though he's doing the right thing, may not necessarily think through what the impact is. The earliest example I can see, or that's top of mind, is I just saw the animated reconstruction of Evil of the Daleks, and there's one point where Jamie essentially chews out the second doctor for the doctor's doing all these things that Jamie doesn't understand, and it's very much, it's almost it's like a Sylvester McCoy scene 2 decades earlier. But in looking at, I think I'm thinking back to Flux, where Tech Dayun tells the doctor, well, oh, you think I was bad to you. You take people on, you travel with them, aren't they? They're your experiments. I mean, would it be fair to say that there's maybe we kind of see the doctor as that they have values, but sometimes those values don't get translated well depending on the doctor? Would that be a fair statement?
I
think sometimes, oh, go ahead, Eric.
Oh, sorry. I think that, yeah, I think that's a fair statement. I think the doctor almost always has, and always has throughout the history of the character, had that core moral character, like who he is and who it comes out in different ways, in different incarnations of the doctor. Certainly from right off the bat with William Hartnell is a very, the first doctor is very different. He doesn't have that kind of warm relationship with humanity yet. He's still learning. He's still kind of growing as a person. And the neat thing about, if you watch throughout the Hartnell era is he starts off as kind of this spiky, mysterious kind of old curmudgeon, and eventually becomes more of a grandfatherly. He really fully leans into being the scientist and the wanderer, and has this like almost adorable curiosity about things, and just watching that character grow. And then of course, as they make the creative decision to make him become a totally different person, and then I think we start to play with the writing. Each time they try to make the character a little different for each actor brings something new to it. But we always have that core, I think, moral character. Even in Hartnell, he's he is outraged by the same things that always outraged the doctor. And you mentioned the seventh doctor as well. Could be a bit mysterious. He's a bit of a chess player, and he's a bit of a manipulator, even, you could say. But I think at the core of the character, he still has that strong moral ground, moral center. I think he likes to maybe play God, if you will, a little bit more than others, but yeah.
Okay. And so looking at the show, we've talked about the values of the doctor as a character. What do you see as the values of the show? And I know, different eras, different writing styles, different production teams, but whether new classic or both, what do you see as kind of the core values of Doctor Who?
I think the core values I take away from it, and I've seen some classic and more of the New Who because I came in New Who era, but never be, always be questioning, always be exploring, always keep your sense of wonder. Like sometimes the Doctor has a very childish reaction to things. I don't know, let's find out. You know, that's the Doctor sometimes. And sometimes the Doctor is very cross. But I think sometimes when the Doctor comes off as cross, it's because he is the smartest person or she is the smartest person in the room. And the people around the Doctor just can't catch up to where the Doctor is going right now, or what the Doctor has already come to understand, kind of in a Sherlock sense. Sherlock was also like that, where he was often smarter than Watson and Watson had to catch up. Sometimes that happens with the companions, where it can come off as the Doctor being cross. And sometimes the Doctor is cross, but for a reason. It's never because the Doctor just wants to be mad. It's because of the situation going on. And so I think the core values of the show have always been be an explorer, be an adventurer, ask why things are happening, try and help where you can. Like the Doctor always helps, always. Even if they can't fix the situation, they always try and help. And so one of the things I get from Doctor Who is try and help where you can. And then in my own personal life, if you can't help, don't hurt. You know, that I don't think I've ever heard that on the show directly, but I think the Doctor would agree with that. And then, you know, sometimes we're thrown into situations that we aren't prepared for, but if we stay true to who we are, we can meet the situation. Like the Doctor is not always prepared. Even this season, the whole flux thing, the Doctor was the first 5 episodes still trying to figure out what was going on, you know, but the Doctor was still the Doctor, even in her response to Division, even in her response to the baddies this season. I can't think of what they were called, Time and something else, right? The crystal people. You know who I'm talking about.
Swarm and Azure.
Yep.
Swarm and Azure, that's right. But yeah, even in her response to them, she was, you know, the same person. She wasn't one person for Swarm, one person for Azure, and one person dealing with the Angels or Division. It was all the Doctor. And the Doctor is that person trying to do good in the world, trying to figure out what's going on in a situation and respond to it the right way. Rise to the occasion.
I think some of the things
Go ahead, Eric.
Some of the things that immediately appealed to me about the Doctor and about the show was just the character's dedication to, and I know the question you posed was about the core values of the show, but I think that is reflected through the Doctor. So, but yeah, their dedication to doing the right thing, their commitment to, I won't straight out say pacifism, but to nonviolence, or at least to not harm, was always a big thing. But ultimately, I think one of the things that appeals to me the most about the characters that they're not Superman. You know, they're not a superhero. They ultimately are fallible, which I think is probably the Doctor's most human trait, because in a lot of science fiction and a lot of superhero fiction, we have these characters, and they do have their flaws and are written and as such. But I think ultimately the thing that's the most human about the Doctor, as alien as he can be, is his fallibility. So the imperfection. He's not always right. He's not always doesn't always make the right decision. Works with the information they're given, and kind of moves forward with in the sense of just trying to do the most good that they can in that situation. And I think that is more relatable to myself, at least, in your day-to-day life of dealing with the world, than perhaps, having super strength and flight and X-ray vision and something like, from the superhero realm is. Because I know I've often heard the comparison that the Doctor is kind of a superhero-esque character, and where that is true in some senses, I think that's ultimately where the Doctor is not a superhero, is that the fallibility or the kind of imperfection in them. So
Right. And kind of picking up on both of your points, like a couple of values that I really see in the show are it values kindness, compassion, and empathy. There are usually within any episode, it's the way there's always a focus on the Doctor isn't hanging out with kings and rulers and emperors necessarily. He's always kind of gearing down towards there's a scene in Father's Day with the Ninth Doctor where he's talking with this couple and said, oh yeah, we met in a taxi at 3 a.m. at Soho or some words like that. And he said, oh, that's the adventure I can never have. And it's one of the things that attracted me to the show is that it's, there's that kind of, other shows that I grew up with, like Star Trek, were focused on rationality and science and that kind of, that uniquely American urge to explore because it's the final frontier. And I think with Doctor Who, it's much more of it finds as much sense of wonder in kind of the mundane and the everyday, as well as in the kind of, where Star Trek might see vast planets and colonies, the Doctor's always, in some episodes, there's even usually a scene, a kind of rough scene. A rough paraphrase would be, there's one group that's being pointed out and said, oh, don't hang out with them, they're bad. And we're not talking Daleks here. And the Doctor will say something to the effect of, well, they deserve love and respect as well. They deserve to be treated with kindness. Even something more recently, like Demons of the Punjab, it may not be overt, but there's this effort for the Doctor to kind of be within that culture. And I think that's something that it's, I think Eric spoke to some of the divisiveness that's happening earlier, and it's one of the things that I'm amazed a lot of people haven't really picked up on. I think the new series has done a much better job in terms of not just diversity and inclusion, but also kind of that idea of compassion across the board versus kind of this, kind of more binary. Would either of you or both of you, I'd like your thoughts on it, because I'm not quite sure if it's if it's my unique read or if it's just something that is there and I just happen to be seeing in terms of that tend towards empathy and kindness and gentleness.
I mean, I certainly think it's part of the kind of the soul of the show, especially in the modern era. But I think you could make the argument that it's certainly there in the classic era. I mean, the classic era is, and I kind of hate the phrase "of its time" because people use it as like a free pass on a lot of things, but there's a certain amount of truth to it as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so it's a little softer. It doesn't quite have the pathos and kind of the it's not played up to the modern standards of drama the way it is in the new series. So primarily, I'm going to talk about the new Who series, but I think empathy, kindness, inclusion, diversity are all major, not just things that the show is about, but things that are built into its DNA. It's what it is. And that is, like you said the kind of binary nature of a lot of genre fiction. Things are good and evil, and there's good characters, there's evil characters, and those weird alien three-eyed monsters over there are evil, and the your hero characters are good. And that's, I think they draw with a lot softer lines in Doctor Who and in a lot of modern sci-fi. But I think the Doctor as an agent of kindness, and I think back to the kind of the culmination of the 12th Doctor's time, the lesson that Peter Capaldi's Doctor learns throughout that time is, and maybe not the lesson, but the last thing that he feels it's worthy to say to the world is, be kind. That is the entire entirety of what he leaves us with, kind of. So I guess what I'm getting at is it's an incredibly kind show, as that makes sense. But I think its core values are those kindness, empathy, diversity, inclusion. We were watching Flux just recently with the new series, and my wife, who is a fan, but not to not to the level of myself, was watching along with me, and just kind of really actually turned and commented like, wow, they've really done a good job with including like all different types of people in this show. And she said it's been like that for a long time, but that's one of the strengths she thought of the newer series is the inclusion and visibility that people have. And I think it's fantastic. I mean, I'm rambling a little bit, but yes, I totally agree. And I think those are not just things that the writers are writing about. They're things that are quintessential to Doctor Who. It's not Doctor Who without those concepts.
I totally agree. I think, we know in our heads as Doctor Who people that the Doctor is certain things, kind, empathetic. But I like Gordon's point about the Doctor being drawn towards everyday people. Even with the modern era, the latest, not this season, but last season, when the Doctor met Ada Lovelace, and how Ada Lovelace was being silenced, and she's like, no, Ada's really smart, I think the Doctor is naturally drawn to people who get overlooked and people who are more valuable than they seem, the diamonds in the rough. And I think that is a wonderful thing about the show, is that, the Doctor oftentimes gives an ear to people who would not be given, advantage, would the Doctor not be there to say, hey, we need to listen to that person. The other thing is, the Doctor sometimes as a man has been able to use his agency as a man to say, you need to listen to a woman. And I think, that's something that's coming into the modern zeitgeist right now. Equal time for genders and maybe listening sometimes more than we have before. And I think that's wonderful. And one of the things that really does draw me to Doctor Who, whoever is the Doctor.
Well, I kind of want to jump off of Kathy's point about the Doctor and agency. And it's going to lead into my next question, because one of the things that the current series has done, actually what Chris Chibnall has done, is kind of throw a light on the Doctor as a character through Jodie Whittaker. Like in the Witchfinders, she's saying, hey, look, people would have automatically assumed my authority as a dude. And spoiler alert for those of you watching, there may be a bit of a disagreement. I can't guarantee it, but I'd like to ask the both of you, throughout the Chibnall era, how do you think the Chibnall era, given all that we've talked about in terms of the values of the show, how well do you think he's brought those values to the fore in his writing, if he's brought those to his writing, and to how the whole series has shaped under his tenure?
I think especially early, the writing was pretty uneven for Jodie. And I think it kind of suffered a little bit because they were being so diverse, because they had so many people changing the stories. Like there wasn't, like, Chibnall now is showrunning. He's showrun this season. And like, this is one of the seasons that I have immensely enjoyed. Whereas the other two seasons were kind of hit and miss for me. But, whenever you have some other showrunner taking over, certainly Davies and Moffat had differences. I can tell a Davies style episode from a Moffat one with David Tennant, especially because he had both writers. And there are differences, and the showrunner's job is kind of to make that overarching story kind of connect. And I feel like in the first season of Jodie, we got a lot of disconnected stories. Like some of them were fantastic, like the Rosa Parks episode, amazing, like some of the best Doctor Who I have seen ever. But then we had like Kerblam, and that I think Kerblam was very close to that episode, if I'm recalling right. And like the writing is just so different between the two episodes that I think that suffered a lot in the first season, and we lost viewership as a group because of how uneven it was. But it's gotten so much better as it's gone along, and I think that happens when you're new. You try some ideas, you learn what works, what doesn't, and then you improve upon it from there. And I think it has gotten better under the Chibal era now.
Yeah, I tend to agree with almost everything you said. I think for me, it's been kind of hit or miss writing wise. I'm still enjoying the show in general. I'm not a hater out there writing diatribes on the internet about it. And so, but I do think that what we were talking about core values have survived it throughout the era, whether the episodes are my favorite or not. I do think that Jodie Whittaker's doctor still personifies these same elements, the things we kind of identified as core values. She's certainly, and I know there's people probably argue with this, that I never had any question once she, got into the swing of things that this was the doctor. Like there was never any and it's, for me, it's been a little bit less, I guess the style is a little less bombastic than Stephen Moffat's style. He's very big. Everything's kind of like big event stuff. Everything's going to pay off huge. There's going to be these big moments. We're all going to cry a little bit. And there's these, fireworks, kind of everything's big and showy. Chris Chibnall's a very different kind of writer. I don't think he has quite the flair that Stephen Moffat does. At his best, he has something different. And that's, I think he really gets into individual characters. He gives everybody a little bit of background to their detriment. Sometimes he gives people a little bit too much detail and then brutally murders them on screen, which is a little upsetting. But I think his nuances and his ability to kind of like develop the everyman, like you were talking about earlier, that the doctor kind of is attracted to. So we really get a very interesting, diverse cast of characters that are all actually characters. They're not just there to kind of, play off the doctor, or they're not there just to be red shirts, to use a Star Trek term. Everybody's got some real characters to them. I've enjoyed that aspect of it a lot. But yeah, when it comes back to the core values, I think everything is alive and well there. And in fact, is perhaps been focused on in some places that it wasn't. When you're writing something like Stephen Moffat writes a script that's going for the big emotions, the excitement and the tears and the joy and the bombast of all of it. It's you might miss some of the nuance that Chibnall's writing brings to things, but yeah, I think the core values are alive and well, and I think they're exemplified throughout Jodie's tenure as the 13th Doctor. The most recent series, I think, actually has pulled back a little bit on some of that, like really kind of focused character writing that he would sometimes awkwardly insert into episodes and give us these long character scenes where I'm not sure they always belonged. But yeah, to actually answer the question, I think yes, I think the core values are still very much intact. Whether you love or hate the writing, or you feel like it's kind of hit or miss like I do, yeah, it's all there.
Yeah, and I think, kind of building on both your points, I think under Chibnall's reign, the values are there. I just think part of it is an issue of writing quality, but I think sometimes, at least for me, it's an issue that I kind of had with some of Moffat's stuff, is that Chibnall lays a little bit too heavy of a hand. A good example is the Rosa Parks episode. A lot of people, spoiler, mostly cisgender heterosexual white dudes over 40 like me, have complained that they thought Rosa was too hokey, it was over the top, they thought they didn't like it. And they thought Chibnall did a bad job. Well, Chibnall didn't write the script. The script was written by a woman named Marjorie Blackman, who is a woman of color in England. She's best known for a young adult series called Noughts and Crosses, which is about Africa colonizing Europe rather than vice versa. It's made a miniseries. It's available for streaming on Peacock, but the only stuff that Chibnall seems to have, and I could see where that script was originally about maybe the inevitability of history. Rosa's not going to get on the bus. The doctor, Ryan, Graham, and Yez have to make sure she does. The stuff with the space racist and the space prison and the I could see that as being Chibnall's influence. I think the first two seasons, you could kind of see where instead of letting the writers write and then maybe pruning, like kind of what Terrence Dicks would do back in the classic era, which is, okay, you do 2 drafts, I'll rewrite it, or I'll rejigger it, write that script and get it through. And I think with Flux, I think it helps that because there's no other writers except for one co-writer. It's given the fact that it was produced under COVID, and there was, I think they may have had an episode removed, so it went from like 7 to 6. I think Flux is a lot more exciting, and I think it's one of those where I don't quite see the values of Doctor Who come out, but I think part of it is just it was done in such a rush that I don't think it's the fault of Chibnall or the directors or the actors. I just think it's good, given what we got, it's like, because it was COVID, we got better than should be expected. And Eric, you have your hand up?
Yeah, and it's probably a bit of a digression, but I think it speaks to the general point that we're going for. But I do think that Flux had an interesting moral dilemma for the Doctor and a moral decision that she had to make. And that is that she's in the middle of a personal quest to find out who she is and where all of this stuff, and whether the Master's, story of the timeless child and all of this stuff is her real history, and what other memories have been erased from her. But she has to kind of put all this stuff on hold and make the decision to put everything on hold and save the universe. Now it turns out that these things are kind of intertwined with her past, but it certainly is an interesting moral dilemma that and speaks to the Doctor's character, that by the end of Flux, and obviously big spoiler alert, that she is able to drop that fob watch wherever she drops it into the TARDIS and say, no, this isn't what's important. What's important is me standing in between, the universe and whatever is out there trying to destroy it. So I think ultimately you have that major moment that speaks to the Doctor's morality as a character in Flux. And that's that she kind of puts this whole thing behind her in a way, and who knows where it's going from there, but she's able to put, value the greater good or whatever, being the Doctor over the minutia and the details of her past. So, and maybe we as fans should follow along with that.
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, Eric, because she actually asked the TARDIS to hide it for her, keep it hidden from her. And, we've seen that in the past. Like, I think in Chris's era of the TARDIS, when it came back, he would talk to the TARDIS. And Rose definitely has talked to the TARDIS because she's held the TARDIS. And so we saw that again, like the relationship the Doctor has with the TARDIS again. And, we saw it in that one episode, right, with when the TARDIS gets sucked out into a human body, and the Doctor can actually speak to the TARDIS. But it was kind of nice to see that again, because that is something that other Doctors have done in the past. And also the TARDIS does have secrets, and the TARDIS does keep secrets. And I really like that. But the Doctor's ultimate decision to say, my past isn't important, what's important is protecting people, I think that's one of the things that is key to the Doctor. And the Doctor's made that in the vein of that decision before. So I really, really did like the ending of Flux that way.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people took offense at it because it's like, oh, she spent 6 episodes searching for this and she puts it away. But it's not about, she doesn't throw the watch away. She doesn't destroy the watch. What she does is probably the most compassionate thing she could do for herself, which is, okay, TARDIS, you hide this. And unless I really, really want to know, I can tap into it. It's there. And I think that's ultimately one of the, I mean, Doctor Who, I think one of the key things that resonates for me about it is that it's almost like, um, it's like a Rorschach test, you know, it's, um, what you see in it, says a lot about the kind, it not only allows me to see the kind of person I'd like to be, but it's like, oh, this is something that, um, it, it really allows me to realize that, yeah, that is my value. And that if I, you know, I was not adopted. Um, I know people who have been. I know people who've developed a family of choice versus a family by chance. And I think in all of those narratives, there's something powerful about the person who says, yes, I can choose to go back and look at my past if I want to, but right now I don't want to. This is not who I am. And I think ultimately one of the biggest themes in Doctor Who, it's, and this may be taking it way, way out into the reeds, but it's about identity, and it's about being who you are despite despite everything else. You know, one doctor got away with wearing a ridiculously long scarf. One doctor, as my good friend Terry at Third Coast Comics would say, dressed like Dracula. One dude wore celery on his lapel. One just wore a U-bomber jacket. One wore sand shoes. One thought bow ties and Stetsons were cool. Well, Stetsons are cool. Bow ties are debatable. But there's always something about the doctor that is very uniquely them. And I think in that there's I think the overall one of the best values is it's about the individual. It's a lot of the doctor's enemies tend to be like multitudes, you know, it's the Daleks, you know, it's the Cybermen, it's these kind of more anonymous types of enemies. Of course, it's just me. Does that, I ask both of you, how do you feel about hearing that? And it's okay to say that I'm full of it. I'm no problem with that whatsoever.
No, it's an aspect of the character of the show, or even of the most recent storyline, that I hadn't really considered. Reading it as being about, you know, a voyage of discovery almost, or finding yourself, finding where you belong. But it's so obviously can be read that way, and maybe should be read that way, because we can't forget that the Doctor is a character who comes from a society that does not always share their values, the Doctor's values. So oftentimes the Time Lords and the Doctor are in direct conflict with one another, you know, when it comes to the value system. So the Doctor is not from this like super race of wise people that are all the same. This is a person who has kind of found their way out of their, like, as you said, their birth family, or their family by chance, you know, and being Gallifreyan society, and gone out on their own and kind of found their own place in the world. So there is a part of the Doctor. Certainly the Doctor could be described as selfless in a way, but there's an aspect of it that certainly is inward looking, and certainly does value herself, especially in Flux. I think that's a major part of the story, is coming to terms with, like, you know, does this matter? Does the past really is important, you know, as people give it this weight of, you know, historically who you are and where it sets you in the universe. Is that important, or is my new family, the fam and the TARDIS, is what is important? You know, the Doctor and the TARDIS, you know, out there fighting the monsters, saving the world. And yeah, so I think it's a good point. I think it's, yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what Gordon was saying about, in some ways, Doctor Who is a Rorschach test for us, because we do see the things we want to see in the situations. There are times that it doesn't work out for the Doctor, and maybe the situation does look worse. Sometimes that's temporary and sometimes that's permanent. Normally permanent is like a one-off show and we don't think about it as much. And the temporary ones tend to resolve, especially in the Stephen Moffat era, the temporary ones would resolve to something really good in the end, or really exciting. But yeah, you know, I do think like we've been saying, at the core of the show, there is this idea that has survived and that will continue to survive, because that's really the brilliance of Doctor Who, that the Doctor is certain things that cannot be changed, no matter who is embodying the Doctor at the time. Gender, actor, doesn't matter, because each of the male Doctors, we had so many differences. We had kind of the old get young Doctor and the cute Doctor, and the Doctor who's super smart and the Doctor who's like an insolent little child, going back to the classic era, and like you said, the grumpy Doctor, the grumpy old Doctor who becomes more of an adventure and explorer. So each of them was different, but they still embodied at the core that thing that is the Doctor. And in some ways it's hard to put into words what it is, but when you see it, you know it. And we see it with each Doctor, and we know that's the Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
I love that each fan, and I think it's like you said, Rorschach test again, but like each fan has that moment. And again, a little digression here, but he has that moment where each Doctor like clicks. And I can even remember like some of the episodes, like when it was like all of a sudden like, oh, okay, there you are. Like, I see you now. And it's like, that's the Doctor. So yeah, you're right. It's hard to like put it in a box what exactly it is. I think we're touching on many of we're getting close, but it is interpretive. I think for each person, we're getting something personal out of it.
Okay, yeah, and I think that's a pretty good place to maybe start wrapping up, because I think that this is the kind of panel that we could go on for hours and hours and hours. But I think that would take away from all the other really great panels and the Discord conversation and all the other activities that Console Room 2022, Satellite 9 has planned. Subtle plug, isn't it? So let's finish by any parting thoughts, Eric, starting with Eric.
I guess parting thoughts is, I think Doctor Who is just very, very personally important to me. And I know, obviously, if you're here attending Console Room and you are, watching this panel, I'm sure it's very important to you as well. I think it is interesting when we have a chance to kind of talk to other fans about what exactly it is that makes it important, because I like a lot of fiction of different sorts, from everything from science fiction, horror to whatever. I'm a fan of many things, but Doctor Who is at the special, like, on the special pedestal above almost everything else that I've become a fan of in my life. And so trying to put your finger on why exactly is that, and I think it comes back to kind of the premise of this panel, like, is the core values that the show speaks to are things that are not only important to me, but things that I perhaps aspire to be, in my day-to-day life, and often fail, but that's the kind of the aspirations of the kind of person or the kind of influenced in the world that you would like to leave behind. And so yeah, I think it's of course it's still a fun, silly sci-fi show with monsters and all that stuff, and I love that about it as well. But I do feel like it just has this level of importance for me because of some of the values that it's not necessarily instilled in me. I found it too late in life for that to be the case, but helped me, or that I identified with me, or I identified with it. And yeah, it's been quite a ride so far, and I enjoy every time I get an opportunity to sit down and talk with other fans about it. And yeah, I guess we didn't get a whole lot into like lockdown kind of digital events that we were talking about, but I do know that I took part in a couple of events of Console Room last year being all online, and also the Chicago TARDIS 2020 was also a digital only event. So I think by extension and through events like that, and I know Gordon, your meetup group has been doing online and digital fan events as well, digital meetups. I think we are able as fans to kind of have a community that kind of does support each other in that way, and in a difficult time. And maybe it's because of the morality that the show has. Maybe it's because us as a fan base is kind of, maybe I guess what I'm trying to say is it's perhaps a two-way street. It kind of reflects, we get something from it, but I think it gets something back from the fans and the community too. You see, try not to read too much about it on social media because there's a lot of really awful stuff out there. But I think predominantly the Who fandom has been such a positive, wonderful community to get involved with. And I think we support each other. And especially during the pandemic, I think it's great that people, we're still out there, safely supporting one another and having these conversations. So, yeah, thanks, Gordon, for putting this all together. And it was a lot of fun to talk with you guys. And if you get a chance, check out the Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. As part of the Direction Point Doctor Who podcast network, you can find our podcast and many other great Doctor Who podcasts at directionpoint.org. So go and check that out if you're interested. And thanks again.
Thank you. Kathy, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I will just say, I think, don't lose your sense of wonder in this world. Never be afraid to look at something with a fresh perspective or with new eyes. And most importantly, in these times, the lesson we can take from the Doctor is be kind to one another. Look for ways to help one another. Through COVID, help has looked like a lot of things for me. There was a time I was out of work and we were in the food lines and we were getting our food that way. Thankfully, I'm back at work now, and we no longer need that. But, lots of people have needed lots of help in lots of ways with COVID that we didn't think we would ever. And so be kind and look for ways to help. I was glad the help was there when I needed it. And I hope anybody who ever needs help can reach out somehow and get the help that they need.
Thanks.
And that's an everyday person thing.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. And I'm going to end by talking a little bit about the pandemic, because Eric kind of touched on that, and that was part of the original idea for the panel. Running a meetup has been, especially online, has been a challenge during the pandemic. Part of it was that just a lot of technical snafus, and it's a lot of it has had to do with me figuring out how to use Zoom, realizing that with my internet access, video is not going to work. So we shifted over to Big Finish audios. And depending on when this is scheduled, there may or may not be, you may have a Big Finish panel coming up soon at Console Room 2022, Satellite 9. Again, another subtle plug. But what I'm finding is, and I thought, okay, people are going to complain, because a lot of people were like, one person after a major glitch commented, even though this was a free event, I want my money back. And it's easy because there's been a lot of I've received a lot of harassment because I encourage people to stay safe. I've kind of moved towards online, with in-person being somewhere in the future when things are okay. But what I'm finding is, I think ultimately a lot of people, Doctor Who is not this commodity. It's not this thing where, okay, you come and you get Doctor Who. It's a great bonding thing. There is power in a shared experience, and Doctor Who and running a meetup allows that. I mean, I haven't had, and this may sound like hyperbole, I haven't had this much fun running the meetup with all its aggravations and all its quirks since organizing a massive showing of Day of the Doctor on November 23rd, 2013. And I've had one or two people tell me that, well, at least one person has said that changed his life. I take no credit for that. That's the power of Doctor Who. I think no matter what its form, I think there's something inherently powerful about how Doctor Who touches on a lot of shared experiences and shared values. And I think community is one of them. It's that not only that quest to find your place, but it's also about the fact that the doctor always has a found family, whether it's the Tylers, whether it's a bunch of soldiers in 1970s or 80s England, depending on who you talk to, whether it's Ryan and Graham, there's always, or the Ponds, there's always the sense that people find each other, and that people connect. And I think, especially during the pandemic, that sense of connection is what we've needed really badly. It's one of those things that I harbor no illusions. Like, I am not this grand poobah of Doctor Who fandom. What amazes me is that I know so many great and wonderful people. And I know that sounds self-serving, but I think that's the ultimate value of Doctor Who. It's not about me or you individually. It's about us. But it also reminds us that we are all really wonderful and great individuals. I want to thank the both of you for joining me tonight. For those who are curious about, check out the Police Box in a Junkyard podcast. You can find Chicago Doctor Who Meetup. Our Twitter is @WhoMeetup. We're on Facebook. We're also on Patreon. And our website is chicagodoctorwhomeetup.com, and it has links to everything. I want to thank everyone for being part of this panel. I want to thank you, attendees of Console Room 2022, for joining us. Have a great time. Check out all the other great activities throughout, and hopefully we'll see and talk to you soon. Take care, all. Bye.
Thank you.